My role at Disney is that I am the immersive experience director, one of 3 different immersive experience directors on Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser. It's okay. No, it's okay. It's okay.
You can mess with your own
No worries. So quick show of hands, have you heard of Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser before today? Okay, cool. Most people have. Awesome. Then you know some things about it already. You have an understanding of how it goes. It's an immersive experience. It's an interactive experience. I personally would kind of put it more in the interactive theater camp or the playable theater camp than I would in the immersive theater camp, which I think has a little bit less agency. Where I think that what we're doing at Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, not quite LARP, but very close to it, interactive theater. Other qualifications that I have, I was an adjunct professor at Northeastern University before moving to Florida. I worked at Northeastern for 5 years in the games department and taught everything from game design to the business of games, all kinds of different stuff. I have been the executive director of Boston Fig. With the duties that I have at Disney, it is very hard to upkeep that, so I'm handing off the reins of the executive directorship of that particular organization. And also Chief Creative Officer of Encantrix Productions, which is a production company that I co-founded with Athena Peters, who is an amazing designer in her own right and is continuing to run Encantrix events in Massachusetts. Check them out. There's a bunch of different events coming up. And I also am currently co-executive director of Playable Theater. Evan's a part of Playable Theater. To ask us about Playable Theater, the whole idea behind Playable Theater is that we want to provide resources to make these types of play experiences accessible for everyone. We want to bolster the community of designers who are creating embodied experiences, playable experiences, anything with agency that we feel is really moving the needle forward. The closer we get to making the holodeck, the better everything is, right? So what are we going to talk about today? Quick agenda setup. So first we're going to talk about what is embodiment, what's kind of my definition of embodiment, why are we talking about this, why is it important? I'm going to look at a few case studies of different things that I consider to be really beautiful examples of embodied play. We're going to look at Sign, Shoutdown to Launch, White Death, and Crawling Out of Your Skin, just four quick little examples. And then I'm going to talk about what I consider to be 3 elements for success if you are designing these different experiences, which are the setup, facilitation, and debrief. And I've got some really useful tips and tricks for those things. Then we're going to play a little game together, because you can't put a bunch of game designers in a room and not expect us to play games. All right, so first we're just going to do one thing. Please close your eyes and take a deep breath in. And as you do so, I want you to notice what you're feeling in your body. Go ahead and release that breath in whatever way feels comfortable. And as you do so, I just want you to notice the way that the breath moves through your body. Notice what parts of your body are moving. Notice any tension that you're holding. Notice the way that different thoughts arise even as your eyes are closed. Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes again. So I want to start out by framing this with a little bit of cognitive science. So as you just did this exercise of breathing, that was a very, very small little exercise of embodiment. So embodiment, we'll get to kind of my definition of that later, but there's cognitive science that goes into this that I want to frame for us. So when natural selection has provided this beautiful process that our brains run seemingly automatically. It seems as though this is just one process. We think we are thinking creatures, but actually there are separate processes that are all happening at a very, very fast pace. So first we observe, we make an observation. My breath goes in, I make an observation about how it moves my body. Next, we create a story. We compare our previous experiences to the experience that we're having. We kind of flip through the Rolodex of everything that we've ever known up until this point, and then we create a story about what we're experiencing. So even as your eyes were closed and your breath is moving, you're probably already having ideas and stories that are arising in your mind. If you're me, then you have about 8 billion stories that are competing for attention in your mind. Next, you feel, based on the story that you have created, You have an emotional response to that story, whether that story is meeting your needs or not. You feel some sort of emotion about it, whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion. We have some sort of emotional response. And then we make a judgment, right? We decide based on the story and the feelings that we have, whether or not this is serving us, whether or not this is good or bad, whether it is right or wrong. We have something that is informed by our feelings. So we tend to think of this as one process. We see something, we make a judgment about it. It's not actually what's happening. Embodiment is a practice that allows us to slow down this very, very quick, rapid kind of descent into judgment, where we can start to make a little bit more space between all of these different things, these cognitive processes that are happening. So we can just make an observation, notice the story that we're telling about it, ask, is that true? Is that real? We can have a feeling about something. We can say, am I having that feeling because of this story? Maybe I should go back and look at that story. Is that story actually useful to me? We're noticing a judgment that's coming up. Is that judgment necessary? It is okay for me to just be feeling what I'm feeling. So embodiment asks us, I think, to help create some space around what we're experiencing. So what is embodiment? So we all have bodies, and they all move, even if that movement is just your breath. There's, I want to kind of make the disclaimer that embodiment doesn't necessitate you using your whole body. Embodiment can be any aspect of just using physical aspects of ourselves in order to process different things. So I like to think of embodiment as any practice that makes known something that was previously unknown. So it's a choiceful stepping through our observations, stories, feelings, and judgments. And our bodies are essential to that practice, regardless of any physical limitations that we have. So using our bodies to learn, understand, and process. Why is this important? Well, there are some practical benefits. As educators, we know that there are many different types of learners. So embodiment practice is helpful for people who learn in different ways. If you're not learning from a textbook, you might learn from actually doing an activity. It can also enhance memory. By using our different senses, we associate things and we can retain information better. It helps us to rehearse situations. We can create situations in which, especially for training for safety things, this is especially useful to be able to train in those reactions so that we don't just go into panic when we're in a difficult situation. It also gives us a safety to experiment. We get to try out different things. And then the other benefits that I think are kind of less concrete as educators, but I think very concrete as humans, is that we really start to gain an understanding of our own boundaries, our connections, the somatic experience of our emotions, like what our emotions feel like when they're actually arising. And that can be really, really helpful for just navigating reality. So some classic well-known examples of what I consider to be different embodied practices. Model UN, that's one that a lot of educators really encourage, especially if you're looking at history and politics. Mock trials, LARP, who's heard of LARPing? Yeah. Immersive theater, ritual, meditation, yoga, mystery parties, ecstatic dance, breathwork, psychodrama, true story theater. There are so many different ways to explore embodied practices. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at 4 different case studies. I picked these because I think they're cool. The first one is Sign. So this game is based on the history of Nicaraguan sign language. So Nicaragua in the 1970s didn't have an official form of sign language. In 1977, they brought together 50 deaf children from across the country, and they didn't have a shared language to express themselves, so they did something remarkable and they created one. So Sign is it follows that journey and is a way for players to experience it. So it's a game by Thorny Games. It's built for 4 to 7 players. It's about 2 hours in length in total. That includes the setup, play, and debrief. players are silent the entire time. They communicate with their hands. So players warm up in workshops, then they're given student characters that have goals, personalities, and truths. And they move between their class periods and recess periods, and they have kind of different goals during those different periods. And they're facilitated by a teacher, and the teacher is the facilitator, but they're also in role. And they help those scenarios play out. And there's another mechanic, which is that when they feel they're not understood, you draw a mark on your hands. And then after play, everybody debriefs together, and you can see the ways in which people weren't feeling understood very physically. So really the goal of this game, Sign focuses on creating understanding collaboratively. The game is really quite beautiful. So something that often happens in Sign is that, you know, this is this aspect of embodiment, right? Something that is revealed, the thing that is made known that wasn't known before. So players learn to create a shared language together. They connect to each other in new ways. They develop a rich understanding about what it feels like to not be understood, to not be heard. And they learn that communication can take on many, many different forms. This is something that just happens in 2 hours. They create a whole shared language together. Imagine the possibilities, if you really put your mind to it, of creating language in other ways. So the next case study I want to look at is called SHOUTDOWN to Launch. This is a game about gendered interruption. So a bunch of engineers need to fix a problem. There's a rocket engine, and there's dwindling time before launch, and it's not going to go well. So SHOUTDOWN to Launch is a game by Jason Morningstar, and it was written for the #Feminism Nanogame Anthology. Great anthology. I highly recommend picking it up. Some people in this room probably have contributions in it. And #Feminism has a ton of different games that are really all about these topics of gender and society. And so this game is about 30 minutes long, including all the setup, play, and debrief. The actual gameplay period is only about 15 minutes long. So players are divided first into 2 groups. There are players who have hats, and there are players who do not have hats. They're given complex schematics and an engineering problem, and they're told that they have a very limited time to solve it. So players who have hats are told just to solve the problem. Players who don't have hats are told to take credit for the ideas of the hat-wearing players, to speak over them, ignore them, interrupt them. And after the game is over, players debrief to understand what happened. So SHOUTDOWN is focused on contrasting experience based on a physical trait. So the thing that is embodied here, the thing that is made known, is that players with hats are very annoyed. They don't like the scenario that just unfolded. Players without hats are generally fine. Things went just fine for them. They may not have succeeded in solving the problem, but you know, their experience was they were able to accomplish their goals. And then everyone kind of gains a new understanding during the debrief about what it's like to be treated differently based on a very silly thing like a hat. So players connect and then tie this back to gendered experience, understanding that gendered interruption is really a big problem that happens in society very frequently. So they gain empathy for this new perspective. Our third case study is White Death. So White Death is a game that involves a group of pioneers that are setting out for the mountains with the aim of creating a new society. They're bringing only their absolute necessities. They have their hopes and dreams, and all of their hopes and dreams and their best intentions do not lead them to success. Life in the mountains is too hard and too demanding. They travel too far. They can't find their way back, and one by one, they die. The snow embraces them, giving them silence, peace, and rest, tranquility, and light. This is a very poetic game. It's by Nina Essendrop and Simon Steen Hansen, built for 8 to 15 players. It's about 2 hours long, including the setup, play, and debrief. So setup takes place over about an hour. Like the setup period for this, the workshop period, is an entire hour as players are guided through different exercises that help them to develop physical characterization. Then players are silent throughout the duration of the game. They communicate using their bodies. They communicate what's going on based on where they're standing in light and shadow, the way that they're interacting with properties that they have, like balloons and paper. And then they're guided through feelings like anger, frustration, sorrow, fear, and then the feelings of peace and closeness that follow their characters' gentle deaths. And it's got a soundtrack by Tom Waits, Nick Cave, and Johnny Cash, which really sets the mood. So White Death really focuses on atmosphere and not outcome. The outcomes are not nearly as important as just the experience itself. So the thing that happens that's often revealed, and then afterwards everybody debriefs. And I think that the thing that is made known here is just how differing the experiences are that people have. So players use movement to convey their intentions and stories and feelings, but people often report that they have very different understanding of what was going on. So people have their own very interesting stories and feelings that arise based on the way that people are interacting with the lights and the shadow and with each other and other things that are going on. So those feelings really range from transcendent to melancholy. Some people consider this, this experience to be incredibly beautiful and peaceful and makes them very happy and at rest. And other people feel a lot of grief and sadness and devastation over what happens. So I really feel like this game is a beautiful example of what happens when we all just are looking at the same teacup. We all have a different angle on what's going on. We all have a different perspective, and this game helps to reveal that. The last case study is a game called Crawling Out of Your Skin. So in this game, you meet a spider dance instructor and you learn how to be connected to your mind, body, soul, and spirit in an ecstatic dance experience using the 5 rhythms dance tradition. So Crawling Out of Your Skin is a game by me. I wrote this game. So it was created for a pop-up immersive experience called the Night Cafe, which ran in 2019. It's for 7 players and 1 facilitator. The whole thing runs about 20 minutes long, including the setup, play, and debrief. So players are welcome to a very spooky, fantastical environment where there are cobwebs and black lights, and they meet a contorting spider-themed dance instructor who then guides them through 5 different movement forms, which are based on a dance practitioner named Gabrielle Roth. She developed something called the 5 rhythms dance tradition, and those 5 rhythms are flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness. And so as they warm up and kind of move through these different forms and are instructed about how to be able to move, they come alive. They really start to dance and move together. And finally, in the last movement form of stillness, people are instructed to actually hold physical space for one another, standing in a circle, as volunteers enter the circle and then are instructed to just release whatever it is that they would like to release. Before leaving, they then must thank every person for what they shared before they're able to exit. Afterwards, they debrief for about 5 minutes. So crawling really focuses on creating connection and transformation through shared movement, and doing so in the safety of a fantastical setting. And that helps us have something we'll talk about later called alibi. So the results, the things that are revealed here. So people often start off very uncertain. A lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable with a lot of different movement forms, but through the kind of fantastical setting and then the instructor modeling behavior, it kind of gives everybody this sense of alibi. And we'll get into what that is a little bit later. So the first 4 movement forms help everybody to really warm up and start to feel ready to move. And then during stillness, many people choose to go into the center and share something very powerful. It varies in its form, but it's always something very raw and very honest. And so once people are in that debrief, they often just leave with these powerful new bonds. Many people become friends after sharing this experience together. having, gained an understanding of that person in such a raw physical way. So those are our case studies. And now I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the three elements, really what I think a lot of embodied experiences and a lot of embodied play have in common, and that really can help to create impactful experiences. So those three elements are the setup. And in setup, you really want to be focused on gaining consent, laying out the boundaries and expectations of your experience. Facilitation, which is to, cultivating an environment that is organized and enabling play. And then your debrief, so setting aside time to process and understand your experience. So in setup, you're really going to be trying to empower your experience with good onboarding. So a good setup creates consent. It gives participants the boundaries and expectations of your experience and prepares them for play. So an effective setup can be very brief or it can be very lengthy, depending on the type of experience that you're trying to foster, what themes you're playing with, what moods you'd like to engender. So for example, in Crawling Out of Your Skin, the setup of that experience is 2 minutes, and the runtime of everything else is 10 minutes, and then you have 5 minutes of debrief. Whereas for something like White Death, which is dealing with a heavy theme of death and grief and processing, the workshop for that is an hour long before you even get to gameplay. So it really depends on what you're trying to do with your setup. So a very important aspect in my mind for this setup is also setting, which is a lot of the theatrical elements that you're going to be placing into that. So theatrical elements like artifacts. So a lot of these different case study examples that I gave have documentation associated with them. They may have cards, they may have like character bios, things like that. So creating those artifacts, printing and cutting any needed materials that you're going to have for reference ahead of time. Properties. So making or supplying any needed properties. There are all kinds of different uses, like White Death, for example, has balloons and paper that are used as properties. So setting up your space with tables or chairs or pillows or whatever you're going to need in order to be successful. In Sign, you need to have a separate space for recess and a separate space for class, and the classroom needs to have a classroom kind of looking environment and set up with tables and chairs and things, and the recess area is completely open. And then ambiance, cultivating the right mood with music and lighting. I cannot state how useful this is and how essential this is. Just a change in lighting can dramatically change the experience for people. So these theatrical elements really help to create buy-in, create immersion, and then create alibi for the player. Well, what's alibi? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Alibi includes individual legitimizing strategies which enable players to interact and reconstruct a socially acceptable spectrum of play. So alibi is what enables players to act in ways which would not normally be possible. So I took this from the Nordic LARP wiki. Alibi is something that I think, especially in LARP academic circles, that we love to talk about. What creates alibi? So alibi is this feeling of like being enabled to play, being able to take, Caro off, put Caro aside for a little while and be someone else. And now I have alibi. I have a reason to be interacting, whether it's I'm wearing a hat, whether I have a mask on, whether it's the environment itself that creates this sense of I'm not me right now. I can dissolve myself and my ego and become someone else. Alibi is something that is really, really important to help cultivate for these types of experiences and for enabling learning. A lot of times we get really rigid in our sense of self, and when we have that rigidity and kind of are coming from a mind that's a little bit more of a fixed mindset, we might not be able to experience some of the things that we would if we were having more of a growth mindset or a little bit more fluidity. So dissolving the self can be really important for that to happen. Another thing that I think is just as important as all your theatrical elements, those physical elements, is gaining consent. So consent is the foundation for play. In order to gain consent, I recommend using the 3 C's when you're creating your workshops, onboarding, or brief. So those are calibration, communication, and check-in. So calibration is kind of setting expectations, learning what boundaries may exist for players. Communication is creating shared understanding and a sense of safety by being able to actually communicate what's going on. And then check-in, so having systems for checking in during play so that you can ensure that consent is still being had. So here's some example mechanics that support consent. So an example of a calibration mechanic. So, during our workshop, I might say, line up in order of how intense of an experience you are looking to have. People over here are looking for a high intensity experience. People over here are looking for a low intensity experience. And then people can kind of sort themselves and understand both for themselves and each other where they fall on that spectrum, so that if I see that players in my group over here are really in for a high intensity experience, if we're interacting with a lot of folks who are in for a much more low intensity experience, we can modify and adjust our behavior accordingly. Communication. So here's an example of a mechanic. So if you would like to know the inner life of the other person's character, at any time you can fist bump them, and that will be a request for them to monologue in a kind of out of character way about what's going on inside their character's mind at the moment. A check-in mechanic. This is something that is used very frequently in a lot of different LARP scenarios and interactive theater scenarios. So at any time you can make a C shape for check-in, and the other person can respond with a thumbs up or thumbs down. And that lets you know whether or not, so you could just, we're having an in-character argument and we're getting really heated. And I'm not sure at this point if you're actually still having a good time, whether this is fun for you or not. So I just check in, and you can just be like, yeah, actually, this is great. I'm just playing the role. This is all fun. Or actually, I'm not having fun anymore. This is not good for me. So you can also create tons of different mechanics, and there are many, many examples of different mechanics. If you're curious about other workshop and calibration and consent mechanics, this is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about it, so please feel free to find me after, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I also recommend, taking a look at some of these different, there are so many LARPs out there that have just been published for you to view and see, and they have lots of workshops included in them. There's many different beautiful mechanics that are included in these things. All right, so step 2 is facilitation. So facilitation I consider to be kind of modeling behavior and creating environment during play. So good facilitation deepens immersion. It demonstrates to participants what it looks like to be fully present, engaged, and immersed. And it teaches them how to play by modeling behavior, fosters trust through clarity, organization, and very intentional diligence. So good facilitation makes the participants feel safe and supported and heard. So keys that I think of for really great facilitation, I love things in 3s, and I love things with alliteration. So now we have 3 Ps. So preparation, practice, and presence. So preparation, do your homework. If you're facilitating a game, don't just wing it. You're gonna wanna prepare, read all your materials, print everything out, make sure that you have everything prepared ahead of time. Practice, so try just actually doing it out loud. I think that practice is really, really essential. And practice is something that will also come over time too. You may not be the best facilitator right out of the gate, but the more that you do it, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And then presence, so stay in the moment. Try not to get caught up in the minutia. Try not to to go into those thought spirals of, oh, this thing is going wrong, and then I got to do this thing, and I got to do this thing. If you stay present with people, you're going to have much better results than if you had done otherwise. And then the debrief, so creating shared understanding, creating meaning. So a good debrief allows participants to spend time reflecting on their experiences, sharing their stories, and processing their feelings. So debriefs really serve to enrich understanding and then connect the experiences back to a lesson, a truth, or an idea. It doesn't tell the participants how to do this, but instead it asks them to make those connections for themselves through thoughtful questions. And then you can ask those questions before any further exposition is given, before you kind of drive home the point. I don't have three cool alliterative things for debrief, but we'll see an example of a debrief because we're going to play a game together. All right. So first we're going to set up. So if you are interested in playing, go ahead and raise your hand. Yay. Okay. All right. So I'll tell you a little bit about this game, and then I'm going to come around and distribute these pieces of paper. So this game is called The Thin Red Line. And so I'm crediting this game to Hannah Cohen and Jamie Ball. It's a game, a classroom game that Jamie gave a lecture about during one of our Boston Fig Talk sessions. And I loved this game and I thought it was really great. So again, raising your hand if you elect to play, you'll receive a piece of paper. Your piece of paper will have either a black line or a red line on it. You cannot show your paper to anyone. You must keep it secret. The only way that you can tell people whether or not you have a black or red line is with your words and your actions, right? You must embody the way in which you have either a black line or a red line. So in total, there are going to be between 2 and 6 red lines in the room. If you get a black line, your goal is to create the largest group you can with no red lines in it. If you get a red line, your goal is to infiltrate the largest group you can. Infiltrate any group, but the bigger, the better. You will have 5 minutes in total to accomplish these goals. Okay, questions about this game before we do it? All right, so those hands up again so I can count how many people want to play. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, about 20 players. Okay. Oh yeah, questions? Yes, absolutely. You can talk. You certainly can.
Sounds like something a red line would say.
Oh. Okay, I'm gonna come around and distribute. Oh, sure. Yeah. Just gotta make sure that, okay, as long as we got some in there. Okay. And put my mask on. All right, feel free to get up on your feet because we're gonna be moving around for this. Are you playing?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't show it to anyone. You're welcome. Got it? You're welcome. Anybody else? Whoop. Let's not fall down the stairs. All right. Everyone have their slips of paper who is participating? All right, feel free to come up to the front of the room. It'll probably be easier for you to mingle and make groups up here. And then I'm going to call game on. Ready? In 3, 2, 1, begin. How much time do I have? I know we started a little later. Okay, great. That's perfect. That's perfect amount of time.
I know.
They're big, but this is the real black line.
Do we want to redundant black lines?
Oh, we don't want any red lines. So if we keep our group nice and large, but not too large, I think we're great. Like C. Because then suddenly you're so it's then there'll be a collapse. I see the black line through. Really a black line.
I don't even know what it is. You're welcome.
Black line. A whole, right? So we're all parts of a greater whole, which is black lines only red lines. You know the black line song?
All right. Okay, everybody, you've got just about 1 minute left. 1 minute left to finalize your groups. 1 minute left to finalize your group. Seconds to finalize your group. 30 seconds.
We welcome all black line converts back.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right.
What?
That's it. We're done. Groups must be formed. All right. Yeah, no more of that. No more. No more. No more. Okay, we're is this your group?
Yes.
This is your group? This is a group? Are you in a group? Yeah. Which group are you in? That's the group? Is this your group? Is this your group? Okay, red lines, reveal yourselves. Oh! Oh! So what's the largest group with no red lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6? All right. Okay, so now let's debrief a little bit. How's everybody feeling right now? You feel triumphant? How's everybody here feeling?
Wish I were better at stats.
Oh, where in your body were you noticing you experienced those feelings? What kind of feelings arose for you? Nervousness?
Having to put up
Closed
a
off?
facade.
Yes, putting up a facade.
Like a lot of groups kind of like would get tight knit, but then like
Yeah.
kind of expand.
Paranoia, right? There's a lot of skepticism, a lot of paranoia. Amusement.
I took on groups that I didn't actually believe in and they propagated forcefully.
I saw that. I saw that. You even made a song. You made a song by which people could prove their black lininess. So
I don't like lying, and I was bad at it.
the people
I was better.
people know you were.
Correctly.
Oh, absolutely. So how did you guess if somebody was a red line or a black line?
When they ran real quick.
Deflecting, okay. So noticing different behaviors that maybe clued people in. If you were wrongfully accused, how did you defend yourself? Was anybody wrongfully accused? Yeah? How did you defend yourself? Yeah.
I tried to take charge because I came in late. He asked if I had known the Black Line song. I did not, so I ad-libbed one, and
And it happened to be the correct song, right?
charge, and he didn't question it. I'm
So,
trying to put you on.
what made it difficult to defend yourself? What made it difficult to prove? And why was it difficult to make a large group?
Waiting.
Yeah, everyone's waiting, right? So what would we need to solve the red line dilemma? How would we know for sure if somebody was a red line?
Party membership cards.
Party membership cards, okay. Fascism. Fascism sounds like a great solution for this.
What, form the largest group and then
Form the
try to
largest
bring-
group. Exactly.
Okay, so my goal was to try to bring people in so that this group would get larger because this group was smaller. I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure there was a unified group, so therefore it was more diffuse. I could exercise some authority usurping the actual.
Sure, absolutely. So we'd probably need transparency, right? We'd need to be able to see everybody's paper to know if they were a red line or a black line. So, but what if I had lied? What if there had been no red lines? Would your behavior have been different? How? In what way?
We wouldn't have known.
Exactly. You wouldn't have known. You wouldn't have known. So this is, I think, a very interesting thing. Like I think that people are already connecting this to things like, fascism. We're seeing the ways in which this has worked throughout history. So this is a game that I think works really well for kind of describing any form of schismogenesis, any sort of thing in history where we're like understanding a creation of division, right? So the tendency for us to define ourselves in opposition to our neighbors. So understanding those feelings of anxiety and fear and paranoia that we had, seeing those behaviors and how it creates that behavior, even just in a very small, very brief scenario, can lend insight into why people in fascist societies have struggled to organize against tyranny. Or why people said, I have the solution to the red line dilemma. It is the song. It is this song. And if people sing this song, then they are part of the Black Line Society and others are not, right? And so it also creates fascism, right? So there's this, so learning these things, this is the kind of embodiment. We're able to reveal something that was unknown before, have a little bit of empathy for human struggles throughout space and time, right? So that's it. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me. And if you'd like to get in touch, here are my details. And thank you again. This was wonderful.